A stranger's warmth saved my life in a blizzard. Then I discovered who he really was. The SUV tumbled down the mountainside in slow motion, metal screaming against rock and ice, headlights carving wild arcs through the whiteout before disappearing into the ravine below. Caleb Warren stood frozen on the trail, snow stinging his face, watching the exact nightmare that had destroyed his life 3 years ago play out again before his eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to protect himself from the trauma, to keep walking toward his son waiting at home. Instead, his legs were already moving, carrying him toward the wreckage, toward another stranger's crisis, toward a decision that would unravel everything he thought he knew about survival, trust, and the courage it takes to let another person in. If you want to know how a single night in the wilderness changed two broken lives forever, stay with me until the end. And please hit that like button and comment your city below. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The mountain had no mercy. Caleb Warren had learned that lesson the hard way, carved it into his bones through 3 years of grief and single fatherhood, through endless nights when his 8-year-old son Lucas asked questions that had no good answers. The trail home from town should have taken 40 minutes in good weather. In this storm, with visibility down to mere feet and the temperature dropping toward lethal, it might take 3 hours, if he was lucky. He pulled his coat tighter and bent into the wind, each step deliberate, practiced. The wooden walking stick in his right hand found purchase in the snow-covered ground with the rhythm of experience. He'd made this hike 100 times since moving to the mountain after Sarah died, seeking isolation, seeking some kind of peace that remained stubbornly out of reach. The blizzard had come up fast, the way they did in early November at this elevation. The weather report that morning had promised nothing worse than flurries. Caleb had learned not to trust promises. That's when he heard it, a sound that cut through the howling wind like a knife through silk, metal grinding against stone, the distinctive crunch of a vehicle losing its fight with gravity. He turned toward the sound, squinting through the white chaos, and saw the headlights. They were tumbling. End over end, the SUV cartwheeled down the steep embankment beside the mountain road, too far above him for Caleb to have heard it under normal conditions. But sound traveled strangely in a blizzard, carried on currents of wind that defied logic. The vehicle bounced once, twice, then disappeared into the ravine with a final thunderous crash that Caleb felt in his chest. For 3 heartbeats, he stood paralyzed. His mind showed him another crash, another vehicle, another storm. Sarah's car folded around a tree, emergency lights painting the snow red and blue. Lucas crying in the back seat, miraculously unharmed, while his mother, "No." Caleb said the word out loud, his voice swallowed by the storm. Not again. His body made the decision before his mind caught up. He was already moving toward the ravine, already calculating angles and approaches, already reaching for the emergency rope he kept coiled in his pack. The same pack he'd carried the day he'd been 10 minutes too late to save his wife. This time, he was here. This time, he could do something. The descent was treacherous. The slope pitched at 45 degrees, covered in fresh powder over ice, with hidden rocks and deadfall waiting to snap an ankle or crack a skull. Caleb wedged his walking stick into the ground and used it as an anchor point, lowering himself foot by foot. Snow worked its way inside his collar, down his sleeves, into his boots. He ignored it. 30 feet down, he found the first piece of debris, a side mirror, still attached to a fragment of the door. The metal was warm. 40 feet down, a tire, separated from its axle. 50 feet, and he reached the main wreckage. The SUV had come to rest on its roof, wedged between 2 massive pines that had arrested its fall. The front end was accordioned, the driver's side completely caved in. But the passenger side, by some miracle of physics and chance, looked almost intact. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, mixing with the falling snow. Caleb approached carefully, testing each foothold. "Hello?" he called out. "Can you hear me?" No response. Just the wind and the ticking of hot metal cooling in the storm. He reached the passenger side and peered through the window. The glass was starred but not shattered. Inside, hanging upside down from her seatbelt, was a woman. Even in the dim light and strange angle, Caleb could tell she was dressed all wrong for the mountain. Designer suit jacket, silk blouse, heels that had fallen off and lay scattered in the crushed roof that was now the floor. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, dripping upward into her dark hair. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but present. Caleb tried the door. Locked. He grabbed a rock and slammed it against the window. 3 strikes and the safety glass spiderwebbed, then collapsed inward in a shower of cubes. He reached through and unlocked the door from the inside, then pulled it open. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm going to get you out." The woman's eyes fluttered but didn't open. She made a soft sound, not quite a word, not quite a moan. Caleb assessed quickly. The seatbelt was holding her suspended, which meant cutting it would drop her onto her head and neck. He braced himself inside the doorframe, positioned his arms to catch her, and used his utility knife to saw through the belt. She fell into his arms heavier than he expected, dead weight, all her muscles slack. He maneuvered her out of the wreckage as gently as he could, checking for obvious breaks or injuries. Her left wrist was swelling, possibly fractured. The head wound looked worse than it was, the way scalp cuts always did. But her breathing was too shallow, her skin too pale. Shock, certainly. Possible internal injuries. Definite hypothermia if they stayed here. Caleb looked up the slope he'd just descended. No way he could carry her back up, not in this storm, not without risking both their lives. He looked around, getting his bearings. They were maybe 2 miles from his house, as the crow flies, but 5 miles by trail, and she wouldn't survive that journey. But there was another option, something closer. The old logging cabin. He'd stumbled across it last spring during a hike with Lucas, an abandoned relic from when these mountains had been worked for timber. It had been empty for years, but the roof looked mostly sound. It was maybe half a mile northeast, down in the valley where the ridge provided some shelter from the worst of the weather. It was a terrible option, but it was the only option. Caleb shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around the unconscious woman, then lifted her in a fireman's carry across his shoulders. She probably weighed 130, 140 at most, but in his hiking boots on unstable ground, she felt like twice that. He got his walking stick positioned and started moving. The first 100 yards nearly killed them both. Caleb's boot broke through a snow-hidden depression, and he went down hard on one knee, barely managing to keep the woman from hitting the ground. He stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, ice forming in his beard. "Come on, Warren," he muttered to himself. "Lucas is waiting. Get this done and get home." He pushed to his feet and kept walking. Time lost meaning in the whiteout. Caleb focused on the next step, then the next, then the next. His shoulders screamed, his legs trembled. The woman's dead weight seemed to increase with every yard. But he'd carried Lucas through these woods 100 times, had hauled camping gear and firewood and supplies. He knew how to endure. The cabin materialized out of the storm like a ghost, its weathered walls and sagging porch rail almost invisible against the snow-covered trees. Caleb had never been so relieved to see something so decrepit in his life. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but still functioned. Inside, the cabin was barely warmer than outside. One room, maybe 12 by 16 feet, with a rusted potbelly stove in the corner, a wooden table with one remaining chair, and what had once been a cot frame with torn canvas. Rodent droppings littered the floor, but the roof was intact and the walls blocked the wind. It would do. Caleb laid the woman on the floor and immediately went to work. First priority, heat. He checked the stove. The flue was clear, the door still sealed. He stepped back outside and gathered an armful of the driest deadwood he could find from under the porch overhang, then came back and used his emergency fire starter to get a small blaze going. The fire was pathetic at first, more smoke than flame, filling the cabin with gray haze until the chimney started drawing properly. But gradually, impossibly, it began to put out heat. Caleb fed it carefully, building it up piece by piece. Next, insulation. He had one emergency blanket in his pack, paper-thin Mylar, designed to reflect body heat. He spread it on the floor near the stove and moved the woman onto it. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch, her lips faintly blue. Her breathing had grown even more shallow. Caleb knew the signs. He'd taken wilderness first aid courses after Sarah died, driven by some irrational need to be prepared for disasters he couldn't prevent. The woman was sliding toward severe hypothermia. Her body temperature was dropping toward the point where her heart would simply stop. He needed to warm her, and he needed to do it now. Caleb removed her soaked suit jacket, her ruined silk blouse underneath already torn from the accident. He worked quickly, clinically, trying not to think about the intimacy of what he was doing. Her shoes and socks, gone. Her slacks, he hesitated, then removed those too, leaving her in her undergarments. Every piece of wet fabric was stealing heat from her body. He pulled off his own wet outer layers down to his thermal shirt and pants. Then he wrapped them both in the mylar blanket and pulled her close against him, sharing his body heat in the most direct way possible. The woman trembled against him, violent shivers that shook them both. That was actually a good sign. It meant her body was still fighting. Caleb held her tighter, rubbing her arms, her back, trying to generate friction and warmth. "Come on," he said quietly. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." He had no idea if that was true. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the wind outside, the crackling fire, and the woman's labored breathing. Caleb stared at the cabin's rough ceiling and thought about Lucas, probably worried sick by now. His son knew the rules. If Dad wasn't home by dark, stay inside, don't open the door for anyone, call Mrs. Hernandez next door. The boy was smart, responsible beyond his years. He'd be okay for one night. But Caleb hated putting that burden on him, hated making his son worry, making him fear that the mountain had taken his only remaining parent too. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered to the empty cabin. "I'll be home as soon as I can." The woman in his arms stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. For a moment she stared at the cabin ceiling with glassy, unfocused eyes. Then her gaze shifted to Caleb's face, inches from her own, and awareness flooded in. She jerked away, or tried to. Her body barely moved, too weak and cold to obey. "What? Where?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Easy," Caleb said, keeping his tone calm, steady. "You were in a car accident. We're in a shelter. You're safe." Who are you?" She tried to pull the blanket tighter around herself, and Caleb immediately loosened his hold, giving her space. "Where are my clothes?" "My name is Caleb. I'm the person who pulled you out of your SUV before you froze to death. Your clothes were wet and stealing your body heat. I had to remove them to treat your hypothermia." The woman's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the primitive conditions, the dying light filtering through gaps in the walls, the stranger she found herself half naked with. Caleb watched her process it all, the fear, the confusion, the slow realization of just how vulnerable she was. "The storm," she said finally. "I was trying to get back to the city before it hit. The road it disappeared." "Black ice under fresh snow," Caleb said. "Happens all the time up here. You're lucky you're alive." "Lucky." She let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "This doesn't feel lucky. Compared to being dead in a ravine, it's pretty lucky." She closed her eyes, and Caleb saw her jaw clench. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, less frightened, more controlled. "I need to call someone. My phone, no signal up here even in good weather, and your phone is probably at the bottom of the ravine with your car." "Then we need to go. Get to town, get help. In case you haven't noticed, there's a blizzard outside. We're not going anywhere until it passes." The woman opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Caleb saw her taking in his weathered face, his gray-streaked beard, his rough hands. He saw her making calculations, assessments. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked quietly. It was a fair question. Caleb held her gaze steadily. "You don't. But I just risked my life climbing down a ravine to pull you out of that wreck, then carried you half a mile through a blizzard to get you somewhere warm. If I wanted to hurt you, I've had plenty of opportunity." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm sorry. This is terrifying, I know." Caleb carefully extracted himself from the blanket and moved to feed more wood into the stove. "You're in shock, you're injured, and you're completely dependent on a stranger. You have every right to be scared." "I'm not scared," she said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, it's okay to be scared. Fear keeps us alive." He glanced back at her. "What's your name?" "Vivian. Vivian Cross." The name meant nothing to Caleb, but the way she said it suggested it should mean something. He filed that observation away. Well, Vivian Cross, you've got a possible wrist fracture, a head injury that's probably a concussion, and you're still hypothermic. We need to focus on keeping you warm and stable until the storm passes. How long will that be? Caleb looked toward the door where snow was already piling against the gaps. Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be all night. All night? Vivian pulled the mylar blanket tighter around herself. I can't. I have meetings tomorrow, a board presentation. I need to. Right now, you need to not die. Everything else is secondary. The bluntness made her flinch, but she didn't argue. Caleb watched her process this new reality. A woman clearly used to control, to having resources and options, now stripped of all of that, left with nothing but a stranger's goodwill and a barely functional shelter. He knew that feeling. He'd lived it for 3 years. Here. He pulled an energy bar from his pack and handed it to her. Eat this. Your body needs fuel to generate heat. Vivian took the bar with her good hand, her right. The left wrist was swollen to nearly twice its normal size now, mottled purple and black. She tried to unwrap the bar and winced. Let me. Caleb opened it for her, then handed it back. She ate mechanically, chewing without seeming to taste, her eyes distant. I was supposed to be in Seattle by 6, she said after a while. There's a corporate dinner, investors I've been courting for months. They'll understand. You don't know these people. A bitter edge crept into her voice. They don't tolerate weakness. One missed meeting, one sign that you're not completely in control, and they'll move to someone who is. Then they're idiots, and you're better off without them. Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh. Easy to say when you're not the one trying to keep a company alive. No, I'm just the one trying to keep you alive. Different stakes. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. I'm sorry. You saved my life, and I'm sitting here complaining about missing a dinner meeting. I'm not usually this ungrateful. You're not ungrateful. You're processing trauma. There's a difference. You sound like you speak from experience. Caleb fed another piece of wood into the stove. Everyone's got their stories. It was clear from the tone that he wasn't offering to share his. Vivian seemed to recognize that because she didn't push. Instead, she asked, What were you doing out in this storm? Coming home from town. I live up here. Alone? With my son. He's 8. Vivian's eyes widened slightly. Your son is home alone right now? With clear instructions and a responsible neighbor who checks on him, he'll be fine. Caleb heard the edge in his own voice and softened it. He's used to the mountain. He knows what to do. Still, you must be worried. Terrified. But there's nothing I can do about it from here except survive the night and get back to him in the morning. They fell into silence again. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, rattling the cabin walls. The temperature was dropping fast as full darkness fell. Caleb could see his breath in the air, despite the fire. He pulled on his slightly drier outer layers and checked his supplies. 1 protein bar left. Half a bottle of water, frozen solid. A first aid kit with basics, bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers. A waterproof lighter. 50 feet of paracord. A folding knife. And the walking stick that had belonged to his grandfather. Not much to work with. But he'd survived on less. Vivian was shivering again, her teeth chattering despite the blanket wrapped around her. The mylar did nothing to insulate against the cold air. It only reflected whatever body heat she generated, and she wasn't generating much. Caleb made a decision. He moved back to where she sat and carefully positioned himself beside her, opening his coat. Come here. She looked at him warily. What? You need body heat, and I'm the only source available. Your pride isn't going to keep you warm. I don't... She started to protest, then another violent shiver cut her off. Her shoulders slumped. This is humiliating. This is survival. There's no shame in it. Slowly, reluctantly, Vivian leaned against him. Caleb wrapped his coat around them both, creating a cocoon of shared warmth. She was stiff at first, holding herself rigid, maintaining as much distance as possible while still benefiting from his body heat. Relax, he said quietly. The more you fight it, the colder you'll be. I'm not used to... She stopped, seeming to search for words. I don't let people this close. I get that. But right now you don't have a choice. And neither do I. So we might as well make the best of it. Gradually, he felt her tension ease. She settled against him more fully, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Her breathing slowed, deepened. The shivers began to subside. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't mention it." "I will, though. When we get out of here, I'm going to make sure you're compensated for—" "I don't want your money." The certainty in his voice seemed to surprise her. "Everyone wants something." "Yeah, I want to get home to my son. That's it." Vivian was quiet for a moment, then, "What's his name?" "Lucas." "Does he look like you?" Caleb felt a faint smile tug at his lips. His mother. Thank God. He got her good looks and her brains. From me, he just got stubbornness. "She's not—" Vivian caught herself. "I'm sorry. That's too personal. She died 3 years ago. Car accident on this mountain." The words came out flat, factual. Caleb had said them enough times that they'd lost their sharp edges. But in the silence that followed, he could feel Vivian's shock, her sudden understanding. "And you still came down that ravine after me," she said softly. "Even though, especially because, I was too late to save Sarah. Maybe I could save you." Vivian shifted against him, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion she was clearly trying to control. "I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you. I know what that must have cost you." Caleb didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and held her a little tighter. They sat like that as the storm raged outside and the fire burned low. Caleb dozed fitfully, jerking awake every time Vivian's breathing changed, or the wind slammed against the cabin walls with particular violence. She slept more deeply, her body finally warm enough to let go of consciousness. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, Caleb woke to find her looking at him in the firelight. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Her voice was small, younger than before. "I'd be dead in that ravine right now, frozen, alone, and no one would even know where to look until morning, maybe longer. But I did find you, and you're not dead. Focus on that. It's just, I've spent so much of my life trying to be in control, building walls, keeping people at arm's length, proving I don't need anyone." She let out a shaky breath. "And then in one moment, none of that mattered. I was completely helpless, completely dependent on a stranger's kindness." "We're all one moment away from that," Caleb said. "That's the thing about control. It's mostly an illusion. We just pretend otherwise to feel safe." "Is that what you learned? After your wife?" "That and a lot more. Most of it painful." Vivian was quiet for a beat, then, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you live up here? Away from everything?" Caleb considered the question. It was one he'd asked himself plenty of times. "After Sarah died, the city felt like too much. Too loud, too fast. Too many people who didn't understand and couldn't help. I thought if I came up here, if I made things simple and quiet, maybe I could find some kind of peace." "Did you?" "No. Turns out you can't run from grief. It follows you wherever you go." He paused. "But I did find something else. I found out what matters. What's real. It's not success or status or any of the things I used to chase. It's just being present, being there for Lucas. Choosing kindness when you can. It's smaller than I thought it would be, but it's enough." He could feel Vivian absorbing this, testing it against her own life. "I don't know if I could do that," she said finally. "Make things smaller. I've built my whole identity around being bigger, bigger company, bigger deals, bigger everything. Maybe that's enough for you. Everyone's path is different. Or maybe I'm just afraid to find out what I'd be without all of that." The honesty in her admission surprised them both. In the firelight, Caleb could see vulnerability in her expression that he suspected she rarely showed. The walls were coming down, eroded by exhaustion and trauma and the strange intimacy of survival. "You'd still be you," he said. "Just maybe a version that's easier to live with." Vivian's laugh was soft, sad. "God, I hope so." The night wore on. They talked in fits and starts, separated by long silences. Vivian told him about the company she'd inherited from her father 5 years ago. about the pressure to prove herself, about the loneliness of leadership. Caleb told her about teaching Lucas to fish, about the quiet joy of watching his son discover the world, about learning to be both mother and father to a child who deserved better than one broken parent. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the wind began to ease. By 4, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt almost holy. Caleb eased himself away from Vivian. She was sleeping soundly now, her breathing deep and regular, and stepped outside. The world had been transformed. Snow covered everything in perfect, unmarked white, gleaming under a sky suddenly clear and blazing with stars. The moon hung fat and bright, painting long shadows across the landscape. It was stunningly beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you forget, just for a moment, how dangerous these mountains could be. Caleb stood on the cabin porch and looked toward home. 2 miles of fresh snow, maybe 3 feet deep in places, between him and Lucas. He'd need to leave soon, needed to get back before his son woke and found himself still alone. But first, he needed to make sure Vivian could survive until help arrived. He went back inside and gently shook her awake. "Storm's past. I need to go." She blinked up at him, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Little after 4, the snow's deep, but I can make it home before Lucas wakes up. I'll send help back for you." Vivian sat up slowly, wincing as her injuries made themselves known. "How long will that take?" "Couple hours to get home. Another hour to get rescue crews mobilized and back here. You'll be out by mid-morning." "That's..." She looked around the cabin at the dying fire, at the darkness beyond the walls. "I don't know if I can..." "You can." Caleb began gathering his things. "I'll leave you the last protein bar and get the fire built up before I go. You stay wrapped in that blanket and don't move around more than you have to. Conserve your energy." "Caleb!" Her voice stopped him at the door. When he turned back, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why did you do this? Really? You could have left me in that car. You could have saved yourself the risk and the trouble." He thought about lying, about giving her something easy and comfortable. But she deserved better than that. "Because 3 years ago, I wasn't there when Sarah needed me. I was 10 minutes away, and that might as well have been 10 miles. By the time I got to her, it was too late." He held Vivian's gaze. "I can't change that. Can't fix it or undo it. But I could be here for you. And maybe that counts for something." Vivian's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "It counts for everything." Caleb nodded once, then stepped out into the pre-dawn cold. Behind him, through the cabin's single window, he could see Vivian's silhouette against the firelight, a stranger who'd become something more in the span of a single night, though what that something was, neither of them could yet say. He turned toward home and started walking. Behind him, the cabin grew smaller. Ahead, somewhere beyond the white expanse and the sleeping forest, his son waited. And between the two, between the woman he'd saved and the boy who needed him, Caleb Warren walked through the snow and tried not to think about how much harder it was becoming to choose isolation, to maintain the walls he'd built, to pretend that reaching out and letting someone in wasn't the bravest thing a broken person could do. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink when he finally spotted the lights of home. Lucas was standing at the living room window when Caleb finally pushed through the front door, snow cascading off his shoulders onto the worn wooden floor. The boy's face was pale, dark circles under his eyes that said he hadn't slept. The moment he saw his father, something broke in his careful composure. "Dad!" Lucas ran across the room and crashed into Caleb's arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "You didn't come home. You didn't come home, and I thought... I know, buddy. I'm sorry." Caleb held his son tight, breathing in the familiar scent of the cheap shampoo Lucas insisted on using because it smelled like bubblegum. "I'm okay. Everything's okay." "Mrs. Hernandez said the storm was really bad. She said you knew what you were doing, but I kept thinking about Mom and how she didn't come home and..." Lucas's voice cracked, and he buried his face against Caleb's chest. Caleb closed his eyes and just held on, letting his son shake with the fear he'd been holding in all night. Over Lucas's head, he saw Elena Hernandez standing in the kitchen doorway, her weathered face creased with concern and relief in equal measure. "Thank God," she said quietly. "I stayed with him all night, but he wouldn't sleep, just sat at that window, waiting. I'm sorry, Elena, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize for saving someone's life, Caleb Warren. I heard the emergency chatter on my scanner. They're already mobilizing the rescue team for the woman you found. She grabbed her coat from the hook. I'll leave you two alone. Lucas, Mijo, your dad's home safe. That's what matters. After she left, Caleb guided Lucas to the couch and sat down, keeping one arm around his son's shoulders. I need you to listen to me, okay? What happened last night, it wasn't like with Mom. I made choices. I knew what I was doing, and I had you to come home to. That made all the difference. Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You could have died anyway. Yeah, I could have. That's the scary part about life, Lucas. We can't control everything. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes we have to take risks to help others. But I promise you, I didn't take any risk. I didn't absolutely have to, and I came back. I'll always do everything I can to come back to you. What if one day you can't? It was the question beneath all the others, the one that had haunted both of them since Sarah died. Caleb took a breath and chose honesty over comfort. Then you'll have a whole community of people who love you and will take care of you. Mrs. Hernandez, Uncle Mike in Portland, your grandma Jean, you'll never be alone. But Lucas, I'm not planning on going anywhere, not for a very long time. Lucas nodded slowly, then leaned against his father's side. Tell me about the lady you saved. So Caleb did. He told Lucas about the accident, about carrying Vivian to the cabin, about sharing warmth through the long night. He left out the more frightening details, the moments when he'd thought she might not make it, but he didn't sugarcoat the danger or the difficulty. Is she nice? Lucas asked when Caleb finished. I think so. Hard to say for sure when someone's in shock and scared, but she seemed like she was trying to be. Are you going to see her again? The question caught Caleb off guard. I don't know. Probably not. She lives in the city, has a big important job. Once she's recovered, she'll go back to her life and we'll go back to ours. But you saved her life. That means something, doesn't it? It means I did what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble. It doesn't mean we're connected or that anything has to come from it. Lucas looked up at him with Sarah's eyes, perceptive, seeing more than an 8-year-old should. You liked her, though. I can tell. I barely know her, buddy. But you talked all night. You said you shared stories. That's what you always tell me people do when they're starting to be friends. Caleb couldn't argue with his own logic coming back at him. Maybe we started to be friends, but that doesn't mean, look, she's going to go back to her world, and that's okay. Some people come into our lives for just a moment. They're not meant to stay. Like Mom was meant to stay but didn't. The pain in Lucas's voice made Caleb's chest tight. No, buddy. Mom wanted to stay. She would have if she could. That's different. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the morning light grow stronger through the windows. Outside, Caleb could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors, the rescue team heading to the cabin. He wondered if Vivian was awake, if she was scared, if she'd remember any of the things they'd talked about in the darkness. Dad? Lucas's voice was small. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think you'll ever stop being sad about Mom? Caleb pulled his son closer. I don't think the sadness goes away, but it changes, gets softer around the edges, hurts less, and other things start to matter more, like making sure you're happy, making sure you know you're loved. The sadness becomes part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am. Does that make sense? I think so. Lucas was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you helped that lady, even though it scared me. Mom would have wanted you to. Yeah, she would have. They stayed on the couch until Lucas finally fell asleep against Caleb's shoulder, exhausted from his night of worry. Caleb sat there holding him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and thought about Vivian in that helicopter, being carried away to warmth and safety and the life she'd built for herself. He thought about her question from the night before. Why had he really done it? The answer he'd given her was true, but it wasn't complete. The complete truth was that for 3 years he'd been sleepwalking through his days, going through the motions of living without really engaging with life. And last night, climbing down that ravine, fighting to keep another person alive, he'd felt something wake up inside him, something he'd thought died with Sarah, the will to connect, The courage to care about someone beyond his son, the risk of letting the world touch him again. It terrified him. 3 days passed before Caleb heard anything more about Vivian Cross. He spent those days in his normal routine, getting Lucas to school, working on his freelance graphic design projects from home, hiking the mountain trails to clear his head. He told himself he wasn't thinking about her, wasn't wondering how she was recovering, wasn't replaying their conversations in the cabin. He was a terrible liar, even to himself. On the 4th day, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of his house. Not the ruined vehicle from the ravine, but something newer, more expensive. A driver got out, professional, suited, clearly not from the mountain, and opened the back door. Vivian Cross emerged, and Caleb barely recognized her. Gone was the disheveled, frightened woman from the cabin. This Vivian wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly mortgage. Her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, minimal makeup that somehow made her look more intimidating rather than less. Her left wrist was in a professional brace, but otherwise she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread on corporate power dressing. Caleb watched from the window as she approached his porch, her heels clicking on the stone path he'd laid himself last summer. Lucas appeared at his elbow, eyes wide. "Is that her? The lady you saved?" "Yeah." "She looks scary." "Yeah," Caleb said again, though what he felt wasn't exactly fear, more like recognition that he and this woman existed in completely different worlds, and her presence here was a disruption to the careful boundaries he'd established. The doorbell rang. Caleb took a breath and opened it. Up close, Vivian looked less intimidating and more uncertain. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the fading bruise on her temple, and her eyes had the same vulnerability he remembered from the cabin. But she was trying hard to project confidence, control. "Caleb Warren?" she said, as if she didn't know perfectly well who he was. "Ms. Cross, I heard you made it out okay." "Thanks to you." She glanced past him to where Lucas was trying to look casual while clearly staring. "Is that your son?" "Lucas, come say hello." Lucas approached with the caution of a kid who'd been taught not to trust strangers too quickly. "Hi, I'm Lucas. My dad says you were in a car accident." "I was." "And your father saved my life." Vivian's professional mask slipped slightly, showing genuine warmth. "You must be very proud of him." "I am, but I was also really scared." "I bet. I'm sorry I kept him out all night. That must have been terrifying for you." Lucas considered this, then nodded. "It was. But he says you couldn't help being in an accident, and he couldn't help trying to save you, so I'm trying to be okay with it." "That's very mature of you." Vivian looked back to Caleb. "Could we talk? I know I should have called first, but I wasn't sure if you'd take the call." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because you made it pretty clear you didn't want anything from me, and I'm here to offer you something anyway." Caleb felt a familiar wariness settle over him. "Lucas, go work on your homework, okay?" "But Dad, now, please." Lucas shot him a look that promised questions later, then trudged upstairs. When his door closed, Caleb turned back to Vivian. "You want to come in?" "If you don't mind." He led her to the kitchen, the most neutral space in the house. She looked around, taking in the modest surroundings, the scarred wooden table, the mismatched chairs, the child's drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets. Her gaze lingered on a framed photo of Sarah, Lucas, and Caleb from before the accident, all of them laughing at something the camera had missed. "Your wife was beautiful," Vivian said softly. "She was. I looked you up, after. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to know more about the man who saved my life." She set her expensive leather bag on the table. "You used to be a senior art director at Morrison & Wells in Seattle. Award-winning campaigns, fast-tracked to creative director. Then you left it all and moved up here. And that surprises you?" "It's just, you had everything. Success, recognition, a future. Why walk away from that?" Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Because none of it mattered after Sarah died. The awards, the career, the reputation, it was all just noise. I needed quiet. And Lucas needed a parent who was actually present, not someone chasing the next deadline." "So you just gave up?" "I changed priorities. There's a difference." Vivian sat down at the table, uninvited but not unwelcome. "I've been thinking about that, about what you said in the cabin, about making things smaller. about finding out what matters. And? And I'm not sure I know how to do that. I've spent so long building up the company, my reputation, my defenses, that I don't know what would be left if I took any of it away. So why are you here, Vivian? She met his eyes, and Caleb saw the same raw honesty he'd glimpsed in the cabin. Because that night changed something for me. When I woke up in that wreck, when I realized I was probably going to die alone in the cold, all I could think was that no one would really miss me. My employees would be relieved. No more demanding boss. My board would replace me within a week. My competitors would celebrate. There was no one who would mourn me for who I am, only for what I represent. I'm sure that's not true. Isn't it? I have colleagues, not friends. Business relationships, not personal ones. I've been so focused on being untouchable that I've made myself unreachable. She pulled an envelope from her bag and set it on the table. This is a check. More money than you'd make in 5 years of freelance work. It's not enough for what you did, but it's what I can offer. Caleb didn't touch the envelope. I told you I don't want your money. I know, but I need to give you something. I need there to be some transaction here. Some exchange that makes sense in my world. Because what you did, risking your life, sharing your warmth, talking to me like I was a person instead of a title, I don't know how to process that. I don't know how to live in a world where people do things without expecting something in return. Then maybe you're living in the wrong world. Vivian's laugh was hollow. Probably, but it's the only one I know. She stood up, leaving the envelope on the table. Keep it. Don't keep it. Donate it. I don't care. But please, take it. Let me at least pretend that I've settled this debt. There is no debt. There is. The outburst surprised them both. Vivian took a breath, composing herself. There is, Caleb. Because you gave me something I can never repay. You showed me what it looks like when someone chooses compassion over self-preservation. When someone sees another person's humanity and responds to it without calculation or agenda. And now I have to go back to my life knowing that exists, knowing I'm not living it, and that's... Her voice broke. That's harder than dying in that ravine would have been. The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Caleb spoke. What do you want from me, Vivian? Really? I don't know, maybe just permission to figure it out? To not have that night be just a story I tell at dinner parties about the time I almost died. To let it mean something. It already means something. You're alive. That's enough. Is it? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and felt too little for too long. You said everyone's one moment away from helplessness. I had my moment, and I survived. But now what? Do I just go back to who I was and pretend it didn't happen? People do it all the time. Could you? After your wife died, could you have just gone back to the way things were? The question hit harder than she probably intended. No, but that was different. Was it? Or did we both get shown something true about life and about ourselves, and now we have to decide what to do with that knowledge? Before Caleb could answer, Lucas appeared in the kitchen doorway. Dad, can Ms. Cross stay for dinner? We're having spaghetti and you always make too much. Caleb shot his son a look. Lucas, it's okay, Vivian said quickly. I should go. I've taken enough of your time. Please stay. Lucas moved into the room with the fearless directness of children. Dad's not a great cook, but the spaghetti's usually okay, and I want to hear more about the accident. He won't tell me the scary parts. Lucas, that's not appropriate. Why not? You're always saying I should face hard things instead of hiding from them. Well, I want to face this. I want to understand what happened that night. Caleb saw Vivian fighting a smile. Your son makes a compelling argument. He's 8. He's not supposed to be compelling. I'm very mature for my age, Lucas said with the absolute confidence of someone who'd been told this many times. Mrs. Hernandez says I'm an old soul. Mrs. Hernandez says a lot of things. But Caleb could feel his resistance crumbling. There was something in Vivian's face, hope, maybe, or loneliness, that made him want to say yes despite every instinct telling him to maintain distance. Fine. You can stay for dinner, but nothing fancy, and Lucas, you're helping cook. Deal. An hour later, they sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Caleb and Lucas had eaten hundreds of meals alone and shared spaghetti that was, as promised, just okay. Lucas peppered Vivian with questions that somehow managed to be both innocent and penetrating. She answered honestly, talking about the fear, the cold, the strange comfort of Caleb's presence in the dark. "Were you scared of my dad?" Lucas asked through a mouthful of pasta. "Lucas, don't talk with your mouth full, and that's rude." It's okay." Vivian considered the question seriously. "At first, yes. A little. I didn't know him, and I was vulnerable. But your dad has this way of being calm that made me feel safe. Like he'd seen scary things before and knew how to handle them." "He has," Lucas said quietly. "After Mom died, he used to have nightmares, really bad ones. I could hear him through the walls, but he doesn't have them as much anymore." "Lucas, it's true, Dad, and it's not embarrassing. Ms. Cross, do you have nightmares now?" Vivian set down her fork carefully. "Yes, about the crash, about the cold, about what would have happened if your father hadn't found me." "What helps?" The simple question seemed to undo something in Vivian. Her professional composure slipped, showing the raw edges underneath. "I don't know yet. I've only been home a few days. The doctor said it might take time." "Dad says time doesn't heal things, but it helps you learn to carry them better." "Maybe that's what'll happen for you too." Caleb stared at his son, wondering when exactly Lucas had become so wise. "Where did you hear me say that?" "You were talking to Mrs. Hernandez last month." "I wasn't eavesdropping. I just had good hearing." Lucas turned back to Vivian with absolute sincerity. "If you want, you can come back and have dinner again. Maybe if you talk about it more, it won't seem so scary." "Lucas, Miss Cross has her own life in the city. She can't just—" "Actually," Vivian interrupted softly, "I'd like that. If it's okay with your father." Caleb found himself caught between his son's hopeful face and Vivian's careful vulnerability. Every reasonable instinct said this was a bad idea, that letting her into their life would complicate things, that he'd worked too hard to build a simple, protected existence to risk it now. But Lucas was right. He did tell his son to face hard things instead of hiding. And maybe this, allowing connection, accepting that someone might need what he had to offer, was the hard thing he needed to face. "Okay," he heard himself say, "you can come back, but no more checks, no more trying to pay me back. If you're going to be here, you're just here, as a person, not as some kind of transaction." Vivian's smile was small, but genuine. "Deal." After dinner, Lucas insisted on showing Vivian his room, his collection of rocks from the mountain, his drawings of the forest. Caleb watched from the doorway as his son shared his world with the same generous enthusiasm he showed everything. And he watched Vivian respond with real interest, asking questions, admiring finds, treating Lucas like a person worth listening to. It was nearly dark when she finally left. At the door, she turned back to Caleb. "Thank you, for dinner, for letting me intrude on your evening." "You didn't intrude. Lucas liked having you here." "So just Lucas?" Caleb met her eyes and admitted more than he'd intended. "No, not just Lucas." "Then I'll come back, if that's still okay." "It's okay." She nodded and walked to her waiting car. Before getting in, she turned back one more time. "Caleb, that night in the cabin, you said you couldn't change the past, but maybe helping me counted for something. I want you to know it counted for everything." Then she was gone, the expensive SUV disappearing down the mountain road, taillights fading into the dusk. Caleb stood on the porch long after she'd vanished, trying to understand what had just happened, what door he'd just opened. Lucas appeared beside him, bundling into his jacket. "She's nice. Different than I thought she'd be." "Yeah, me too. Are you glad she came?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet. Ask me again in a few weeks." "Okay." Lucas leaned against his father's side, and they stood together watching the stars emerge. "Dad? I think Mom would have liked her. She always said you needed friends who challenged you." The observation, so simple and so true, made Caleb's throat tight. "Yeah, buddy, I think she would have." That night, after Lucas was asleep, Caleb stood in his kitchen staring at the envelope Vivian had left on the table. He hadn't touched it all evening. Now, alone, he picked it up and looked at the amount written on the check inside. $50,000. It was absurd, generous beyond reason, and completely beside the point. He tore the check in half, then in quarters, then kept going until it was confetti in his hands. He threw the pieces in the trash and felt lighter for it. Some things couldn't be purchased. Some debts couldn't be paid. Some connections were beyond transaction. He just hoped Vivian would understand that when she came back, and he hoped he'd be ready to explain what it meant that he wanted her to. Outside, the mountain stood silent under its blanket of stars, keeping its secrets and offering no answers. But for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Warren went to bed thinking about the future instead of the past, wondering what might grow in the space between two broken people trying to learn how to be whole. Vivian came back the following Saturday, and this time she arrived alone, driving a modest rental sedan instead of the chauffeur-driven SUV. She wore jeans and a sweater that probably still cost more than Caleb's entire wardrobe, but the effort toward casualness was noted. Lucas saw her first and bolted out the door before Caleb could stop him. "Ms. Cross, you came back. Dad said maybe you wouldn't because city people don't usually like the mountain, but I told him you seemed different, and I was right." Vivian laughed, and the sound was lighter than Caleb had heard before. "You were absolutely right, Lucas. And please, call me Vivian. Ms. Cross makes me feel like I'm at a board meeting." "What's a board meeting?" "Something very boring that adults have to sit through and pretend to care about." Lucas grinned. "Like when Dad makes me sit through church services at Mrs. Hernandez's house?" "Lucas!" Caleb had reached them now, shooting his son a warning look. "We talked about this. You don't have to love it, but you show respect." "I am showing respect. I'm just also being honest." Lucas turned to Vivian conspiratorially. "Dad says honesty and respect can happen at the same time if you're smart about it." "Your dad sounds very wise." "He is, mostly. Sometimes he's just stubborn." Caleb rubbed his temples. "I'm standing right here." "I know. That's why I'm telling Vivian now, so she knows what she's getting into." Vivian met Caleb's eyes over Lucas's head, and something passed between them. Amusement, understanding, a shared recognition that this 8-year-old was somehow running the show. "I appreciate the warning. So what do you two usually do on Saturdays?" "Depends," Lucas said. "Sometimes we hike, sometimes we work on the house, sometimes we just hang out and Dad tries to teach me things I'll need to know when I'm older, like how to change a tire or cook something besides spaghetti." "All crucial life skills," Vivian said seriously. "What about today?" "Today we were going to cut firewood. Winter's coming and we need to stock up, but that's probably boring for you." "Actually, I've never cut firewood before. Could I help?" Lucas looked skeptical. "You're wearing really nice clothes." "I have a change of clothes in the car, just in case." Caleb found himself speaking before he'd decided to. "You plan to stay?" "I hope to, if that's okay. I brought things I could leave, old jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt, things that could get dirty." She paused. "I wasn't assuming. I just wanted to be prepared." There was something vulnerable in the admission, the acknowledgement that she'd thought about this, planned for it, hoped for acceptance. Caleb saw past the expensive car and designer casual wear to the woman who'd whispered desperately for warmth in a freezing cabin, who'd admitted to a loneliness so profound that near death had forced her to confront it. "Go change," he said. "We'll get the tools ready." 20 minutes later, Vivian emerged from the house in clothes that actually looked lived in. Faded jeans with a patch on one knee, scuffed boots, a green flannel shirt that had seen better days. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, and without the armor of her business attire, she looked younger, more uncertain, more real. "These were my dad's," she said when she caught Caleb looking. "From before he built the company, when he still did manual labor. I kept them after he died, but I never wore them. They seemed like they belonged to someone I didn't know. And now? Now I'm trying to know him, trying to understand the man he was before success changed him, before it changed me." Lucas appeared with an armful of work gloves, offering a pair to Vivian. "These are Mom's. Dad keeps them in the shed. They should fit you." Caleb felt his heart clench. He'd forgotten about Sarah's gloves, forgotten they were even there. But Lucas had remembered, had thought to offer them. And there was something both painful and right about seeing them on Vivian's hands. They worked through the morning, Caleb showing Vivian how to use the axe, how to split logs along their grain, how to stack wood so it would dry properly. She was terrible at first, missing the logs entirely, or catching the axe on knots that sent vibration shuddering up her arms. But she didn't quit. She listened, adjusted, tried again. Lucas appointed himself supervisor, offering commentary and advice with the absolute confidence of someone who'd been doing this for years. "You're gripping too tight, Vivian. Dad says you have to let the axe do the work, not muscle it. And watch your stance. You're too square. Turn your feet like this." "When did you become an expert?" Vivian asked, breathing hard. "Dad started teaching me when I was 6. He says physical work is good for understanding how things really work, not just how you think they should work." "Your dad says a lot of wise things." "I know. It's annoying sometimes." Caleb was about to protest when Vivian caught his eye and shook her head, smiling. Let the kid have his moment. So Caleb just kept working, splitting logs with the practiced rhythm of 3 years' experience, while his son coached a CEO on the finer points of woodcutting and his own thoughts spun in uncomfortable directions. This felt dangerously normal, dangerously right, like something that could become a pattern, a habit, something he'd miss when it inevitably ended. By noon, they'd cut and stacked 2 cords, and Vivian looked like she'd been through a war. Her face was flushed, her hands blistered despite the gloves, her expensive jeans now decorated with wood chips and tree sap, but her eyes were bright, alive in a way Caleb hadn't seen before. "I did it," she said, looking at the stacked wood with something like wonder. "I actually contributed something real." "You worked hard," Caleb acknowledged. "Most first-timers give up after an hour." "I'm not most people." "No, you're really not." The words hung between them, meaning more than they should. Lucas, oblivious, grabbed Vivian's hand. "Come on, I'm starving. Dad, can we make lunch?" They assembled sandwiches in the kitchen, Lucas chattering about school and his friends and the science project he was working on, about why trees lose their leaves. Vivian listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just humoring a child. "You're good with him," Caleb said quietly, while Lucas was digging through the refrigerator for pickles. "He's easy to be good with. He's honest and curious and kind. You've raised him well." "I'm trying. Some days I'm sure I'm screwing it all up." "Welcome to being human." Vivian leaned against the counter, close enough that Caleb could smell her shampoo, something floral and expensive that clashed wonderfully with the scent of wood smoke and hard work. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you really let me come back? You made it clear you don't want anything from me. You tore up my check. You've built this whole life around simplicity and isolation. So why let me complicate it?" Caleb thought about lying, about giving her something easy and deflective. But she deserved better. "Because Lucas was right. I do need friends who challenge me. And because that night in the cabin, I remembered what it felt like to connect with someone, to be seen by someone. I've been hiding up here for 3 years, telling myself I'm protecting Lucas, building a stable life. But maybe I've just been protecting myself. From what? From caring about someone and losing them again. From letting anyone matter enough to hurt me." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "And you think I might hurt you?" "I think anyone I let in might hurt me. That's the risk of caring about people." "Then why take the risk with me?" Caleb met her eyes. "Because you asked. Because you came back even though I gave you every reason not to. Because I'm tired of being safe and alone." Lucas returned before Vivian could respond, arms full of pickle jars and condiments. But the conversation stayed in the air between them, acknowledged and unfinished, a promise of things that might be said later. After lunch, Lucas insisted on showing Vivian his favorite hiking trail, a gentle path through the woods to a creek that ran year-round. They walked together, Lucas darting ahead to investigate interesting rocks or point out animal tracks, while Caleb and Vivian followed at a slower pace. "He talks about his mother," Vivian said. "Not afraid to mention her, not trying to protect you from the memory. We worked hard on that. After Sarah died, I didn't want to talk about her. It hurt too much. But Lucas's therapist said he needed to be able to speak her name, to keep her alive in his daily life. So we practiced. We told stories. We looked at photos. We let ourselves be sad and happy and angry all at once. That must have been excruciating. It was. But it was better than the alternative, pretending she never existed, making her into something we couldn't touch. My father's been dead 5 years, and I still can't talk about him without putting on my CEO voice, keeping everything professional and distant, like he was just my predecessor instead of my dad. What was he like before the company? Vivian watched Lucas ahead of them, crouched beside the trail examining something in the dirt. Funny, warm. He used to take me camping when I was little, before the business took off. We'd sleep under the stars and he'd make up stories about the constellations. He said every star was a person's wish, and if you looked hard enough, you could see your own up there, waiting for you to be brave enough to reach for it. What happened? Success happened. The company grew faster than he expected, and suddenly he was managing hundreds of employees, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. The pressure changed him, made him harder, more careful. He stopped taking risks, stopped reaching for stars. By the time I took over, he'd built something sustainable but soulless, a machine that generated profit but not purpose. And you've been running that machine ever since. Running it, improving it, expanding it, proving I could be what he became, but never asking if I wanted to be. She stopped walking, and Caleb stopped with her. That night in the cabin, when I thought I was dying, I kept thinking about those camping trips, about the dad who pointed at stars and believed in wishes. And I realized I'd spent 15 years trying to honor his memory by becoming the worst version of him instead of the best. It's not too late to change that, isn't it? I've built my whole identity around being untouchable. My employees fear me. My board respects me, but doesn't trust me. My competitors, well, they'd be happy to see me fail. I don't know how to be anything else. Lucas called back to them, waving excitedly. Dad, Vivian, come see this. They hurried forward to where Lucas was pointing at a deer print in the mud by the creek, perfect and fresh. It was just here, he whispered. Maybe it's still close. Can we wait and see if it comes back? So they settled on a fallen log and waited in the kind of comfortable silence that only happens in wild places. The creek burbled over rocks, birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against bark. Caleb watched Vivian's face as she took it all in, saw the tension gradually leave her shoulders, saw her breathing slow and deepen. This is what I miss, she said quietly. This quiet, this simplicity. In the city, there's always noise, phones, traffic, people wanting something. I can't remember the last time I just sat and listened to nothing. It's not nothing, Lucas corrected. It's everything. Dad says cities teach you to ignore the world, but the mountain teaches you to pay attention to it. Smart dad. I know, Lucas grinned at Caleb. I tell him that all the time, but he never believes me. They didn't see the deer, but they stayed by the creek for an hour anyway, Caleb teaching Vivian how to skip stones while Lucas built an elaborate dam from sticks and mud. It was the kind of afternoon that felt suspended out of time, where nothing important happened and everything mattered. On the walk back, Vivian asked about Caleb's work, his freelance design projects. He told her about his current clients, mostly small businesses and nonprofits, who couldn't afford big agencies but needed professional help. The work didn't pay much, but it was enough to supplement his savings and keep them comfortable. You're undercharging, Vivian said bluntly. The portfolio you showed me, that's agency-level work. You should be billing at least 3 times what you're asking. It's not about the money. No, but it's also not about undervaluing yourself. These clients are getting premium work at bargain prices. That's not generosity, Caleb. That's fear. The observation stung because it was true. Fear of what? Of being seen as successful again, of wanting something more than this mountain sanctuary, of admitting that maybe you're ready to engage with the world instead of just hiding from it. I'm not hiding, aren't you? You've got talent and experience and connections, but you're working for a fraction of what you're worth, taking only projects you can do from your living room, never pushing yourself or taking risks. That's not simplicity. That's safety. Caleb felt his defenses rising. Easy for you to say. You've never had to… What? Never had to rebuild after loss? Never had to figure out who I am without the things I used to define myself by? Vivian's voice was sharp now, cutting. My father died and left me a company I never asked for. I had to step into shoes that didn't fit and pretend they were comfortable. I had to become someone I didn't recognize just to survive. So don't tell me I don't understand loss or fear or the temptation to hide from things that hurt. They'd stopped walking. Lucas was ahead, out of earshot, but Caleb lowered his voice anyway. I'm sorry, that was unfair. Yes, it was. But Vivian's anger was already fading. Look, I'm not trying to criticize your choices. I'm trying to understand them. And maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm seeing in you the same things I'm wrestling with in myself. The question of whether we're being intentional or just being afraid. And what's your answer? I don't have one yet. That's why I'm here, trying to figure out what's real and what's just armor I've worn so long I forgot I'm wearing it. Lucas came bounding back to them. What are you guys talking about? You look all serious. Grown-up stuff, Caleb said. Nothing interesting. Grown-up stuff is usually way more interesting than you pretend. You're just bad at explaining it in ways kids can understand. Vivian laughed, the tension breaking. He's not wrong. Back at the house, Vivian's phone started buzzing with the persistence of someone who'd been trying to reach her for hours. She glanced at the screen and her whole demeanor changed, the relaxed woman from the creek disappearing, replaced by the corporate executive. I'm sorry. I have to take this. There's a situation with one of our suppliers and… She stopped herself. I'm sorry. You don't need the details. I'll just be a few minutes. She stepped outside to take the call, and Caleb watched through the window as she paced the porch, her free hand gesturing sharply, her voice carrying through the glass even though he couldn't make out words. This was Vivian Cross, the CEO, the woman who ran a multi-million-dollar company, the person who made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. It was a stark reminder of the distance between their worlds. She's different when she talks to work people, Lucas observed, appearing at Caleb's elbow. Yeah. I like her better when she's just Vivian, not Boss Vivian. Me too, buddy. Do you think she knows that's who we like? Caleb looked down at his son, at the wisdom in those 8-year-old eyes. I don't know. Maybe that's something she needs to figure out for herself. The call lasted 30 minutes. When Vivian came back inside, she looked exhausted and frustrated. I'm sorry, that took longer than expected. There's a crisis with a shipment from overseas, and my VP of Operations is convinced the sky is falling, and… She stopped. I'm doing it again, making excuses. The truth is I could have delegated that call. I could have told them to handle it without me, but I didn't because some part of me needed to prove I'm still essential, still in control. Are you? Caleb asked. Essential? Probably not. They'd figure it out. In control? Definitely not. She sank into a chair. I'm realizing that most of what I think of as control is just me making myself indispensable so I never have to be vulnerable. If I'm the only one who can solve the problems, then I'm protected. But I'm also trapped. Lucas climbed into the chair beside her. My therapist says feeling trapped is our brain's way of telling us we need to make different choices. Vivian looked at him with genuine affection. Your therapist is very smart. I know. She costs a lot of money, so Dad says she better be smart. Lucas, what? It's true. You literally said that after our last appointment. Vivian was fighting laughter now. Does he always quote you back to yourself like this? Constantly. It's very humbling. It's very honest, Lucas corrected. And you're always saying honesty is important. I'm starting to regret all my wise parenting philosophies. They ordered pizza for dinner, Caleb's concession to being too tired to cook, and ate it sitting on the porch as the sun went down, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Lucas talked about his week at school, about his best friend Marcus and the new girl in class who was really good at math, about the book he was reading about wolves. Vivian listened with the same genuine attention she'd shown all day, asking questions, sharing her own stories from childhood, treating Lucas like his thoughts mattered. Caleb watched the two of them and felt something dangerous taking root in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. The sense that this could be more than just a wounded executive seeking temporary refuge. That maybe Vivian was actually trying to change, and maybe he could be part of that change. After Lucas went to bed, Caleb and Vivian sat on the porch in the dark, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. "I used to know the constellations," Vivian said, looking up. "My dad taught me, but I've forgotten most of them." "That's Orion," Caleb pointed. "The Hunter. And there's Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper, Polaris, the North Star. The one that always points home." "Yeah." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I don't know where home is anymore. The city apartment doesn't feel like home. The office definitely doesn't. This is going to sound pathetic, but I think the last time I felt at home anywhere was in that freezing cabin, wrapped in your coat, listening to you tell stories about Lucas." "That's not pathetic. That's honest. It's both." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about charging what I'm worth, about engaging with the world instead of hiding. You were right to push back. I was being a hypocrite, telling you to take risks when I'm terrified of taking any myself." "What kind of risks are you afraid of?" "All of them. Professional risks. Trusting my team, delegating real authority, admitting I don't have to control everything. Personal risks. Letting people see me without the armor, admitting I'm lonely, accepting help." She turned to look at him. "Telling someone I care about them and not knowing if they'll care back." Caleb's heart was beating too fast. "Vivian, I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I just need to say this out loud, to stop pretending. These past 2 weeks, coming here, spending time with you and Lucas, it's been the first time in years I've felt like myself, like the person I might have been if I'd made different choices. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to go back to the city and pretend this was just a phase, just a reaction to trauma." "So what do you want?" "I want to keep coming here. I want to keep learning how to split wood and skip stones and listen to the quiet. I want to keep talking to you and being challenged and feeling like maybe I could be better than I am." She paused. "And I want you to be honest with me about whether any of that is welcome, or if I'm just imposing on your grief and your sanctuary and your carefully built life." Caleb took a breath, then made a choice. "The first time you came back, I told Lucas I didn't know if I was glad. He told me to ask him again in a few weeks. It's only been 2 weeks, but I have an answer now." "What is it?" "I'm glad. I'm scared and uncertain and not sure this is smart, but I'm glad you're here. Glad you came back. Glad you're trying to figure things out instead of just running away from them." He met her eyes in the starlight. "Lucas likes you. And so do I. Whatever that means, however this plays out, right now, in this moment, I'm glad." Vivian's smile was small and genuine and worth all the risk. "That's enough. That's more than enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, Vivian stood to leave. "I should go. It's a long drive back to the city, and I have meetings tomorrow." "You could stay," Caleb said, then immediately felt his face heat. "I mean, the guest room. Lucas would love having you here in the morning. We make pancakes on Sundays." "I'd like that. If you're sure." "I'm sure." So Vivian stayed, sleeping in the small guest room that Caleb had been using for storage, on sheets that smelled like lavender from the sachet Sarah had put in the linen closet years ago. And in the morning, true to his word, Caleb made pancakes while Lucas told Vivian about his plans for the day and asked if she wanted to help him build a birdhouse. It was ordinary and domestic and terrifying in its normalcy. Caleb caught himself imagining more mornings like this, more evenings on the porch, more shared moments that wove Vivian into the fabric of their lives. He caught himself wanting things he'd thought he'd given up forever: partnership, companionship, the risk of loving someone who might leave. After breakfast, as Vivian was getting ready to drive back to the city, Lucas hugged her goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "You'll come back next Saturday, right?" "If that's okay with your dad." "It's okay," Caleb said. "More than okay." Vivian smiled, and there was something different in her face, lighter, younger, more open than before. "Then I'll be here. And Caleb, thank you for taking the risk, for letting me in. Thank you for asking." He watched her drive away, her rental sedan disappearing down the mountain road, and felt Lucas take his hand. "You like her a lot, don't you, Dad?" "Yeah, buddy, I do." "Good. I think she needs people to like her, really like her, not because of her job or her money or anything like that, just because of her. You're pretty smart for 8. I know, it's a gift. They stood together on the porch, watching the place where Vivian's car had vanished, and Caleb felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself in 3 years. Not just hope for survival, not just determination to get through each day, but actual anticipation for what might come next. The possibility that life could be more than just memory and duty, that he could want something for himself again. It was terrifying. But as Lucas squeezed his hand and pulled him back toward the house, chattering about birdhouse designs and whether they should paint it blue or green, Caleb realized that terror felt a lot like being alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. The pattern continued for 6 weeks. Every Saturday, Vivian would arrive at the mountain house, shedding her corporate armor piece by piece as she drove up the winding roads. Every Sunday, she'd leave a little more reluctantly, carrying back with her something intangible but essential, a lightness, a clarity, a growing sense of who she might become if she had the courage. But on the 7th Saturday, she didn't come. Lucas checked the window every 15 minutes from dawn onward, his face growing progressively more worried as noon approached and passed. Maybe she got stuck in traffic, or had an emergency meeting, or maybe something came up, Caleb said, trying to keep his own disappointment out of his voice. She runs a big company, buddy. She can't always control her schedule. She could have called. Yeah, she could have. But she hadn't, and that silence spoke volumes. Caleb tried to focus on the work he'd planned for the day, replacing a section of fence that had rotted through, organizing the shed, normal Saturday tasks that didn't require Vivian's presence. But the day felt wrong without her, like a song missing notes, and he hated how quickly he'd become dependent on something he'd never asked for. By evening, Lucas was quiet and withdrawn in the way he got when he was trying not to show he was hurt. They ate dinner mostly in silence, and when Caleb tucked him into bed, Lucas finally spoke what had been building all day. She's not coming back, is she? I don't know, buddy. It's like Mom. One day she was here, and then she wasn't, and we just had to accept it. The comparison hit Caleb like a fist. That's different. Mom didn't choose to leave. Vivian, if she doesn't come back, it's because she made a choice about what she needs, what she can handle, and we have to respect that. But what if we need her too? Then we'll be sad for a while, and then we'll be okay, because we've been okay before, and we'll be okay again. Lucas's eyes were too bright, too knowing. Do you need her, Dad? Caleb thought about lying, about protecting his son from the complexity of adult feelings. But Lucas deserved honesty. Yeah, I think I do. Not in a way that means we can't survive without her, but in a way that means life feels better when she's in it. Then why isn't she here? I don't know, but whatever the reason, it's hers to have. We can't control other people's choices, buddy. We can only control how we respond to them. After Lucas fell asleep, Caleb sat on the porch in the dark and stared at his phone. He could call her, text her, demand an explanation, but that felt like pressure, like trying to force something that needed to come freely. So he just sat there, wrapped in the cold November night, and wondered if he'd been a fool to let himself hope. The knock came at 10:30, when Caleb had almost given up and gone to bed. He opened the door to find Vivian standing on his porch, still in her business suit, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I'm so sorry. I tried to get here earlier, but there was a crisis, and then another crisis. And by the time I got free, it was so late, I thought maybe I shouldn't come at all, but I couldn't not come. Couldn't let you and Lucas think I just... Her voice broke. I'm sorry. Caleb stepped aside. Come in. You're freezing. She stumbled inside, and he saw that she was shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper, something that had nothing to do with temperature. He guided her to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then sat beside her and waited. There was a vote, she said finally. The board. They've been planning it for weeks, apparently. A vote of no confidence in my leadership. They think I've been distracted, unavailable, not focused on the company's interests. She let out a bitter laugh. They're not wrong. I have been distracted, coming here every weekend, thinking about things besides profit margins and market share. Apparently that makes me unfit to lead. What happened with the vote? I won, barely, 3 votes. Out of 12 board members, I kept my position by 3 votes. She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. And the whole time they were presenting their case, listing all the ways I've failed them, all I could think was that they were right. Not about being unfit to lead, but about being distracted. Because I wasn't thinking about quarterly projections or investor relations. I was thinking about how I was missing Saturday with you and Lucas, and how that mattered more than any of this, and that terrified me. Why? Because I've built my whole life around that company. It's not just my job, it's my identity, my father's legacy, the thing that gives me purpose and value. If I lose that, what am I? Caleb took her hand carefully. You're the woman who learned to split firewood, even though she'd never held an axe. You're the person who listens to an 8-year-old talk about wolves and actually cares about what he's saying. You're someone who's brave enough to admit when she's lonely and ask for help. That's who you are without the company, and that person is worth knowing. But is she worth being? If I let go of everything I've built, everything I've worked for, what if there's nothing underneath? What if the real me is just empty? There's only one way to find out. Vivian was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands in the blanket. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I think I need to make a choice. About what kind of life I want. About whether I'm going to keep sacrificing everything real for something successful, or if I'm brave enough to try something different. What does different look like? I don't know yet, but I know it involves being here more than 1 day a week. I know it involves delegating real authority instead of just pretending to. I know it involves trusting other people to care about the company as much as I do, even if they do it differently. She turned to look at him. And I know it involves being honest with you about what I'm feeling instead of hiding behind professionalism and distance. Caleb's heart was racing, but he kept his voice steady. What are you feeling? Terrified. Hopeful. Like I'm standing at the edge of something I can't see, and the only way forward is to jump and trust that there's something to catch me. She squeezed his hand. I'm falling for you, Caleb. For you and Lucas and this life you've built. And I don't know if that's real or if I'm just running from my problems, but I can't keep pretending it's not happening. The words hung between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Caleb felt every defense he'd built over 3 years pressing him to retreat, to protect himself, to explain all the reasons this was a bad idea. But he was tired of being safe, tired of choosing isolation over risk. I'm falling for you too, he said, and it scares the hell out of me, because I know what it costs to love someone. I know how much it hurts when they're gone. But Lucas was right. I need you. Not in a desperate way, not in a way that means I can't survive without you, but in a way that means my life is better when you're in it. And I think maybe that's worth the risk. Vivian's tears were falling freely now. What if I mess this up? What if I can't be what you and Lucas need? What if I'm too broken or too scared or too... Caleb pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people do when they care about each other. They don't demand perfection. They just show up and try and forgive each other when they fail. She buried her face against his shoulder and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like 3 years of held-back emotion finally finding release. Caleb held her and let her break, because he knew from experience that sometimes breaking was the only way to heal. He knew that the armor that kept you safe also kept you alone, and that real strength was letting someone see you vulnerable and trusting they wouldn't use it against you. Eventually, the crying subsided into hiccups and shaky breaths. Vivian pulled back, wiping her face with the blanket. I'm sorry. I'm a mess. You're honest. There's a difference. Caleb, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be in a relationship, how to balance my work with a personal life, how to be someone's whatever I'd be to you. Neither do I. I've been a widower for 3 years, raising a kid alone, hiding on a mountain. I'm not exactly relationship material either. So we'd both be terrible at this. Spectacularly terrible. We'd make mistakes and hurt each other and probably have huge fights about stupid things. That sounds awful. It does, doesn't it? Caleb smiled. But I think maybe it's also the only way forward, for both of us. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, from fear to determination, from doubt to decision. Okay, let's be terrible at this together. But I need to do some things first. I need to actually delegate authority at work, put systems in place so the company doesn't fall apart when I'm not there every second. I need to prove to myself that I can step back without everything crumbling, and I need to figure out what my life looks like when it's not just defined by my job. How long will that take? I don't know, a few weeks, a month? I don't want to rush it and fail, but I also don't want you and Lucas thinking I've abandoned you again. Then don't disappear. Call, text. Let us know you're thinking about us even when you can't be here. I can do that. She squeezed his hand. Could I stay tonight? I know it's late and I should probably drive back, but I don't want to leave. Not yet. Guest room is yours. It's kind of become your room at this point anyway. The smile she gave him was watery but genuine. Thank you. For understanding. For not giving up on me. Thank you for coming back. Even late. Even after a terrible day. That means something. They sat together on the couch for a while longer, not talking, just being present with each other. Eventually, Vivian went upstairs to the guest room, and Caleb checked on Lucas, still sleeping, one arm wrapped around the stuffed wolf he'd had since he was 3. Caleb stood in the doorway watching his son sleep and thought about Sarah, about how she'd always pushed him to take risks, to not let fear make him small. She'd hate what he'd become after her death, isolated, careful, choosing safety over growth. But she'd love what he was becoming now. She'd love that he was learning to open up again, to let someone in, to model for Lucas what it looked like to be brave enough to try. The next morning, Lucas came downstairs to find Vivian in the kitchen helping Caleb make pancakes. The boy's face lit up like sunrise. You came back! I did. I'm sorry I was so late yesterday. There was work stuff, but that's not an excuse. I should have called. Lucas considered this seriously. Yeah, you should have. We were worried, but you're here now, so it's okay. Just like that? Just like that. Dad says holding grudges just makes you tired and mean, so I try not to do it. Vivian knelt down to Lucas's level. Your dad is very wise, and I want you to know I'm going to be better about communication, about letting you guys know what's happening even when things get complicated. You deserve that. Okay. Lucas hugged her with the easy forgiveness of childhood. Now can we make the pancakes? I'm starving. They spent the morning together, breakfast, then building the birdhouse Lucas had been planning, then a walk to the creek where the first ice was forming at the edges. Vivian was quieter than usual, more thoughtful, but present in a way that felt different from before, more settled, more certain. When she left that afternoon, she kissed Caleb's cheek, quick and almost shy, like a teenager on a first date. I'll call tomorrow, and I'll be back next Saturday, I promise. I'll hold you to that. Please do. Over the following weeks, Vivian kept her promise. She called every night, sometimes just for 5 minutes, to say goodnight to Lucas and hear about his day, sometimes for hours after Lucas went to bed, talking to Caleb about everything and nothing. She told him about the changes she was making at work, hiring a real COO, creating an executive team she actually trusted, stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategy and vision. She told him about her fear that without control, everything would fall apart, and about her growing realization that her need for control had been the thing holding the company back. Caleb told her about his design work, about the new clients he was taking on at the rates Vivian had suggested, and how she'd been right. People were willing to pay for quality. He told her about Lucas's upcoming science fair project, about the parent-teacher conference where he'd learned his son was struggling with anxiety about losing people. He told her about his own therapy sessions, something he'd started again after years away, recognizing that he needed help processing not just Sarah's death, but the possibility of a future beyond it. They were building something together, even at a distance. A foundation of honesty and communication, of shared vulnerability and mutual support. It wasn't romance in the traditional sense. There were no grand gestures or passionate declarations, but it was real in a way that felt more solid than anything Caleb had experienced before. When Vivian came back the next Saturday, she brought news. I did it. I put together a proposal for the board, a 6-month transition plan where I move to part-time chairman and the COO takes over as CEO. I'll still be involved in major decisions, still guide the company's direction, but I won't be running the day-to-day operations. How did they react? Surprisingly well. Turns out half of them have been wanting me to step back for years, but were afraid to suggest it. They think it'll actually make the company stronger, less dependent on one person, more sustainable long-term. She smiled, and there was pride in it. I'm terrified, but I think it's the right move. I think so too. What will you do with all that free time? I was hoping to spend some of it here, if that's okay. Not every day. I still have responsibilities, still need to be in the city sometimes. But maybe a few days a week? I could work remotely on the days I'm here, be available for Lucas after school, actually be part of your lives instead of just visiting them. Lucas, who'd been pretending not to listen from across the room, abandoned all pretense and rushed over. Really? You'd live here? Like, actually live here? Not exactly live here. I'd still have my apartment in the city, but I'd spend more time on the mountain, yeah. If your dad thinks that's a good idea. Both of them looked at Caleb, waiting. He felt the weight of the decision, the enormity of what they were really asking. This wasn't just about logistics or schedules. This was about letting Vivian fully into their lives, about making space for her at their table and in their routines, about trusting that she wouldn't leave, that she was committed to figuring this out. It was terrifying. It was also everything he wanted. I think it's a great idea, he said, but we need to talk about expectations, about what this looks like, what we need from each other, how we handle it when things get hard. Agreed. I don't want to assume anything. I want us to build this intentionally. So they talked, the three of them, about what a shared life might look like. Lucas wanted Vivian to read to him before bed sometimes, to help with homework, to be there for the science fair. Vivian wanted space to work without interruption, wanted to contribute to household expenses, wanted to learn how to actually be part of a family instead of just performing the role. Caleb wanted honesty when things weren't working, wanted patience as they all learned how to navigate this new arrangement, wanted the freedom to sometimes need space without Vivian taking it personally. They negotiated and compromised and laughed at how strange it was to plan a relationship like a business merger. But there was something beautiful about it too, the care they were taking, the respect they were showing each other's needs, the acknowledgement that good intentions weren't enough. They had to be intentional, deliberate, willing to speak up when things felt wrong. By the end of the conversation, they had a plan. Vivian would start spending Thursdays through Sundays on the mountain, working remotely when needed, being present when possible. They'd reassess in a month, adjust what wasn't working, celebrate what was. And they'd be honest with each other, even when honesty was hard. That night, after Lucas went to bed, Caleb and Vivian sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the December cold. The first real snow of winter was falling, soft and silent, transforming the world into something clean and new. I'm still scared, Vivian said quietly. What if I'm not good at this? What if I let you down? You will let me down sometimes. That's part of being human. And I'll let you down too. The question isn't whether we'll disappoint each other. It's whether we'll have the courage to stay and work through it when we do. I want to have that courage. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't run when things get hard. Then you will be. Not all at once, not perfectly, but you'll get there. Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. When did you get so wise about relationships? You've been alone for 3 years. Exactly. I've had a lot of time to think about what went wrong, what went right, what I'd do differently if I got another chance. He wrapped his arm around her. Turns out grief is a pretty good teacher if you're willing to learn from it. What did it teach you? That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone you're willing to be imperfect with. Someone who sees your damage and doesn't run. Someone who makes you want to be better, not because they demand it, but because being around them makes you remember who you could be. Is that what I do for you? Yeah. You make me remember that I'm more than just Lucas's dad, that I still have things to offer, dreams to chase, a life to live. You make me want to take risks again. Vivian was quiet for a moment. You do that for me too. You make me remember that I'm more than my job title, that I can be soft sometimes, vulnerable sometimes, that I don't have to have all the answers. You make me feel safe enough to not be perfect. They sat together watching the snow fall, and Caleb thought about the night in the cabin, about carrying Vivian through the blizzard, about the moment she'd whispered her desperate request for warmth. He'd had no idea then that saving her life would mean saving his own, that letting her in would mean finding his way back to himself. The snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the house, Lucas slept peacefully. And on the mountain, the wind sang through the trees, and two people who'd been broken in different ways held each other and dared to believe that broken things could heal, that lonely people could find connection, that life could be more than just survival. It could be joy. It could be risk. It could be the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of loving someone and being loved in return, of building something together from the wreckage of what came before. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be hard days ahead, difficult conversations, moments when fear won and they retreated into old patterns. But sitting there in the falling snow, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Certainty that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. That he'd found someone worth the risk, worth the fear, worth the courage it took to open his heart again. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The transition wasn't seamless. Real life never is. Vivian's first full week living part-time on the mountain was a disaster of small frustrations and miscommunications. She took work calls during dinner, forgot to ask before rearranging Caleb's kitchen, and accidentally threw out Lucas's science project notes thinking they were scrap paper. Lucas got clingy and demanding, testing boundaries like kids do when their world shifts. Caleb found himself resentful of the invasion of his carefully constructed sanctuary, snapping at Vivian over things that didn't matter. By Thursday night, they were all exhausted and raw. Maybe this was a mistake, Vivian said after Lucas had gone to bed following a meltdown about homework. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open but ignored, looking defeated. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. For family life, for being here, for any of it. Caleb sat down across from her, tired but determined. We agreed to a month. It's been 4 days. You don't get to quit that easy. I'm not quitting. I'm being realistic. Look at this week. I've done nothing but make things harder for you and Lucas. You've also read to him every night. You made him laugh at breakfast. You fixed the broken cabinet hinge I've been ignoring for 6 months. You're learning. We're all learning. But what if... No. Caleb's voice was firm. No what-ifs. We knew this would be hard. We talked about it, planned for it, promised we'd work through it. So that's what we're doing. We're working through it. Vivian closed her laptop. Okay, then tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what needs to change. So they talked, really talked, with the kind of honesty that hurt but healed. Caleb explained that he needed advance notice before she made changes to the house, that his space had been organized a certain way for 3 years, and sudden shifts felt invasive. Vivian explained that taking work calls wasn't about choosing her job over them, but about managing anxiety. When she felt overwhelmed by the domesticity, she retreated to what she knew. They both acknowledged that Lucas was struggling with the change and needed extra patience, extra reassurance that Vivian being there didn't mean replacing his mother. I would never try to replace Sarah, Vivian said quietly. I could never be what she was to you and Lucas. I know, and that's okay. We don't need you to be Sarah. We need you to be Vivian. But maybe a Vivian who asks before reorganizing and who can step away from work emails during family time. I can do that. And maybe a Caleb who tells me when I'm overstepping instead of just getting quietly resentful. Deal. They shook on it like business partners, then laughed at how ridiculous that was. But the conversation helped. The next day was better. The day after that, better still. They found rhythms, established routines, learned each other's patterns. Vivian started putting her phone in a drawer during dinner. Caleb started saying, "Hey, can we talk about this?" instead of silently fuming. Lucas started treating Vivian like a permanent fixture instead of a guest, which meant he complained to her about being bored and asked her to play video games and generally treated her like family. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely right. 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Lucas's science fair arrived. He'd been working on his project for months, a detailed study of how different variables affected ice formation, inspired by that night in the cabin when his father had saved Vivian. The display board was covered in photographs, charts, and carefully documented observations. The three of them arrived at the school gym together, Caleb carrying the display board while Vivian helped Lucas with his note cards and encouraged him when his nerves kicked in. Other parents stared, not rudely, but with curiosity. The mountain community was small enough that everyone knew Caleb Warren, the widower who kept to himself, and the sudden appearance of a sophisticated woman at his side was noteworthy. Mrs. Chen, Lucas's teacher, approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Warren, it's wonderful to see you, and you must be Ms. Cross. Lucas talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," Vivian said. "Very good things. He's quite impressed with your wood-splitting skills." Lucas beamed with pride as he explained his project to the judges, pointing to his data and photographs, explaining his methodology with the careful precision Caleb had taught him. When the judges asked where he got his inspiration, Lucas didn't hesitate. "My dad saved someone's life in a blizzard. I wanted to understand how ice and cold work so I could know what they went through. Science helps you understand things that seem scary." The judges were impressed. More importantly, Lucas was proud. And when the awards were announced later that evening and Lucas took second place in his grade level, his first instinct was to run to both Caleb and Vivian, hugging them both with equal enthusiasm. "I did it! Did you see? I got second place. We're so proud of you, buddy," Caleb said. "You worked incredibly hard," Vivian added. "That project was brilliant." On the drive home, Lucas chattered excitedly about the other projects, about what he'd do differently next year, about how Marcus had won first place with a volcano, and even though volcanoes were cool, ice science was cooler. Caleb met Vivian's eyes in the rearview mirror and saw his own contentment reflected back. This was what family felt like. Not perfect, not without complications, but real and warm and worth every difficult conversation. That weekend, Vivian's COO called with a crisis. A major client was threatening to pull their contract unless Vivian personally intervened. The old Vivian would have dropped everything and driven to the city immediately. But this Vivian paused, thought it through, and made a different choice. "Walk me through what you've already tried," she said, putting the call on speaker so she could continue helping Lucas with his math homework. The COO explained the situation, the client's concerns, the proposed solutions. Vivian listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and then said something she'd never said before. "I trust your judgment, David. You know this client as well as I do. If you think the solution you proposed is sound, then implement it. You don't need my permission." There was a pause. "Are you sure? This is a 7-figure account." "I'm sure. That's why I hired you, to handle situations like this. I'll back whatever decision you make." After she hung up, Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That was hard for you." "Terrifying. What if he makes the wrong call? What if we lose the client?" "Then you'll deal with it, together, like partners. That's the whole point of delegating." Vivian took a shaky breath. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just, letting go is harder than I expected. Everything worth doing usually is." The client stayed. David handled it perfectly. And Vivian learned that the company didn't collapse without her constant intervention. In fact, it seemed to run more smoothly when she trusted her team to do their jobs. As November turned to December, the mountain transformed under heavy snow. Caleb taught Vivian how to cross-country ski, a skill she picked up with the same determination she'd shown with the axe. They explored trails together while Lucas was at school, moving through the silent forest like ghosts, their breath visible in the cold air. On one of these expeditions, Vivian stopped in a clearing and looked around at the snow-covered pines, the brilliant blue sky, the mountains rising in the distance. "I understand now why you stayed here, after Sarah. It's not about hiding, it's about perspective. Out here, all the things that seem so important in the city, the meetings, the power plays, the constant competition, they just seem small." "That's what I needed to learn," Caleb said. "That I could choose what mattered, that I didn't have to let other people's definitions of success define my life." "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your career?" "Sometimes. Mostly I regret not making this choice earlier when Sarah was alive. We talked about it. Moving somewhere quieter, focusing on Lucas, building a simpler life. But I was always chasing the next promotion, the next award. I thought I had time." He looked at Vivian. "We never have as much time as we think we do. That's the lesson I learned too late to help her, but maybe just in time to help myself." Vivian skied closer to him. "I'm glad you learned it. and I'm glad you were willing to teach it to someone as stubborn as me. You're not stubborn, you're determined. There's a difference. What's the difference? Stubborn people refuse to change. Determined people refuse to give up. You're determined to become someone better than who you were. That's not stubbornness. That's courage. They stood in the clearing for a long moment, just being together in the silence. Then Vivian said quietly, "I love you. I know we haven't said it yet, and maybe it's too soon, but I need you to know. This, us, it's the most real thing in my life." Caleb felt his throat tighten. He'd thought he'd never say these words to anyone again, thought that part of him had died with Sarah. But here, in the snow-covered clearing with a woman who'd come into his life as a stranger and become essential, he found the courage to speak truth. "I love you too. And you're right. It's terrifying, but it's also the best thing that's happened to me since Lucas was born." Vivian kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It wasn't their first kiss. There had been a few tentative explorations over the past weeks, but it was the first one that came with words, with commitment, with the acknowledgement that this was real and lasting. When they got back to the house, Lucas took one look at their faces and grinned. "You guys are being weird, the good kind of weird." "We're just happy, buddy," Caleb said. "Good. You should be happy." You both smiled more now than before Vivian came. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds came uncomfortable truths. But Lucas was right. They were happier. Caleb hadn't realized how much of his existence had been mere survival until he had something to compare it to. The week before Christmas, Vivian's board called an emergency meeting. Her COO had been approached by a competitor with a buyout offer, an offer that would make everyone involved very wealthy, but would also mean the end of the company her father had built. "I have to go to the city," Vivian told Caleb, her face pale. This could be the end of everything. Or the beginning of something new. What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to keep the company independent, to prove I can honor my father's legacy. But another part wonders if maybe this is the universe giving me permission to let go, to choose a different life." "What does your gut say?" Vivian closed her eyes. "That I'm tired of fighting, that I've proven everything I needed to prove, that maybe it's time to let someone else carry this burden. Then trust that. Trust yourself." The meeting lasted 6 hours. Vivian called Caleb afterward, her voice shaky but relieved. "We're accepting the offer. With conditions, employee protections, maintaining the company culture, keeping my father's name on the building, but we're selling. In 6 months, I'll be completely free of operational responsibility." "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Like I just stepped off a cliff and I'm waiting to see if I can fly." "You can. I promise you can." When Vivian came back to the mountain 2 days later, she looked different, lighter, younger, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I have a confession," she said to Caleb and Lucas over dinner. "I've been looking at property. Here, on the mountain." Lucas's eyes went wide. "Really? You want to live here all the time?" "Not all the time. I'll still need to go to the city sometimes, still have my apartment there, but I want a real home here, something that's mine, that's permanent. If that's okay with you guys." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "It's more than okay. It's perfect. There's a place about 2 miles from here. Small cabin, needs work, but it has good bones and an incredible view. I was thinking, if I bought it, maybe you could help me fix it up. And Lucas, you could help me design the garden for spring?" Lucas was practically bouncing in his seat. "Yes, can we plant vegetables and flowers, and maybe a tree we could climb? We can plant whatever you want." Caleb saw what Vivian was really asking, not just for help with a house, but for confirmation that this was real, that they wanted her here permanently, that she was making the right choice. He squeezed her hand and gave her that confirmation. "We'll help. Whatever you need. You're part of this now. Part of us." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for taking a chance on someone as broken as me." "We're all broken," Caleb said. "That's not a flaw. That's just being human. The question is whether we're brave enough to let someone see the broken parts and help us heal." Christmas Eve found the 3 of them in Caleb's living room, a modest tree in the corner decorated with ornaments Lucas had made over the years. Vivian had contributed a few of her own, expensive glass pieces from her city apartment that looked out of place among the construction paper angels and painted pine cones, but that Lucas insisted made the tree more beautiful. They'd spent the day baking cookies using Sarah's recipes, which Caleb had pulled out of storage with only minimal emotional turbulence. Vivian had asked permission first, had acknowledged that she wasn't trying to replace Sarah's traditions, but rather honor them. And somehow that made it okay. Made it possible for Caleb to see his late wife's handwriting on recipe cards and feel gratitude instead of just grief. After Lucas went to bed, practically vibrating with excitement about Santa, Caleb and Vivian sat by the tree, wrapped in blankets, watching the lights twinkle. "I've been thinking about that night," Vivian said quietly, "in the cabin, when I asked if I could get under your blanket. I think about it too. I was so humiliated, so ashamed that I needed help, that I couldn't save myself. But now I see it differently. That moment, admitting I needed you, accepting your warmth, that was the bravest thing I'd ever done, because it meant letting go of control, trusting someone, being vulnerable. I was terrified," Caleb admitted. "Not of you, but of what it meant. That I was letting someone in again. That I was choosing to care about someone who could leave, who could die, who could hurt me. And now? Now I understand that being terrified and doing it anyway is what bravery actually means. It's not the absence of fear. It's choosing love despite the fear." Vivian turned to face him, her expression serious. "Caleb, I need to tell you something. About the future. About what I want. Okay? I want to marry you. Not right now. We're not ready, and Lucas needs more time to adjust. But someday, when it feels right, I want to be your wife. I want to be Lucas's stepmom, if he'll have me. I want to build a life here, with you, on this mountain. I want to wake up next to you and go to sleep next to you and navigate all the boring, beautiful, ordinary moments in between." Caleb's heart was racing, but his voice was steady. "I want that too. All of it. And you're right, we're not ready yet. But knowing that's where we're heading, that makes everything else feel possible." "We have time," Vivian said. "That's the gift, isn't it? After everything we've both lost, after all the ways we've been broken, we have time to heal, to grow, to become the people we want to be together." They kissed under the Christmas tree, slow and sweet and full of promise. And when they finally went to their separate rooms, because Lucas was there, and they were taking things at a pace that honored everyone involved, Caleb lay in bed and thought about how far he'd come from that night on the mountain trail when he'd heard metal grinding against stone. He'd climbed down into a ravine to save a stranger and ended up saving himself. He'd offered warmth in a freezing cabin and received warmth in return. He'd taken the risk of caring again, of loving again, and discovered that his heart was bigger than his fear. Spring came early to the mountain that year. By March, the snow was melting, revealing the green underneath. Vivian's cabin renovations were well underway, with Caleb and Lucas helping on weekends. They'd painted walls together, installed new windows, built a porch where Vivian could work on sunny days. Lucas's 9th birthday fell on a Saturday in April, and they celebrated with a small party, Marcus and a few other friends from school, Mrs. Hernandez and Vivian. They hiked to the creek, had a picnic, and built a new dam that was even more elaborate than the first one. As Caleb watched his son laugh with his friends, watched Vivian helping the kids engineer their dam with the same focused determination she'd once brought to corporate strategy, he felt Sarah's presence, not as a ghost or a weight, but as a blessing. She would have loved this. Would have loved seeing Lucas happy, seeing Caleb healed, seeing their family expanded to include someone as fierce and broken and brave as Vivian. That evening, after the other kids had gone home and Lucas was in bed exhausted and happy, Vivian and Caleb sat on her new porch watching the sunset over the mountains. "I have something for you," Vivian said, pulling a small box from her pocket. "It's not an engagement ring. We're not there yet. But I wanted you to have this." Inside the box was a simple silver compass. "It's engraved," she said. Caleb turned it over and read the words etched into the back. "Home is wherever you are." "That night in the cabin, you were my true north," Vivian explained. "You showed me the way back to myself. And now, wherever we go, whatever happens, you're my home. You and Lucas, this mountain, this life we're building, that's home. Caleb pulled her close, the compass warm in his palm. You're mine too. My home. My true north. The thing I didn't know I was looking for. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them that first night in the cabin, the same stars that had witnessed all their stumbling progress toward each other. A year ago, Caleb had been sleepwalking through his days, convinced that survival was the best he could hope for. A year ago, Vivian had been suffocating under the weight of expectations and loneliness, measuring her worth in profit margins and board approvals. Now they were here, scarred but healing, broken but mending, learning together how to build something real from the fragments of what they'd lost. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would be hard days ahead, arguments and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they'd face those days together with honesty and courage and the kind of love that grew not from perfection, but from choosing each other repeatedly, intentionally, despite the fear. Inside the house, Lucas called out that he couldn't sleep, and Vivian volunteered to read to him. Caleb listened to her voice through the window, steady and warm, telling stories to his son with the same care she brought to everything she did, and knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but small acts of love repeated until they became a life. He thought about that moment in the cabin when Vivian had whispered her desperate request for warmth. He'd opened his blanket and let her in, not knowing that he was opening his heart, his life, his carefully guarded future. He'd thought he was saving her life, but really, they'd saved each other. Two broken people, each carrying their own grief and fear, who'd found in a moment of crisis the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to accept it, to believe that broken things could heal if given enough warmth, enough time, enough love. The mountain stood silent and eternal around them, keeping their secrets, offering their shelter. And in a small house on a quiet trail, a family that had been fractured was becoming whole again, not by forgetting the past or denying the pain, but by having the courage to build a future anyway. Caleb Warren had learned that you couldn't control life, couldn't prevent loss, couldn't hide from hurt, but you could choose how you responded. You could choose to climb down into ravines after strangers. You could choose to open your blanket and share your warmth. You could choose to risk your heart on the impossible chance that love might be worth the fear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that choice would change everything. Inside, Vivian finished the story and Lucas's breathing slowed into sleep. She came back to the porch and settled beside Caleb, her head on his shoulder, their hands intertwined. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and below them, the mountain held them safe, and around them, the night sang with the promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. Not perfect, not painless, but real and true, and absolutely worth the climb.